After watching this anime, even you'll want to be a farmer. Get ready, because this Isekai is a bit peculiar. Hiraku was a man who had a rather complicated life. Everyone he knew betrayed him, and at the end of his life, he suffered from a terminal illness. The one responsible for all of this was the god of that world. In short, the god made a mistake and punished our friend instead of someone else. I think it happened to me too. As compensation for his mistake, the god told him he could choose whatever he wanted for his next life. If you think Hiraku would choose powers or wealth, you're wrong. What Hiraku chose was to live quietly on a farm because, in his final moments in the hospital, all he saw was a farmer's program. The god granted his request and gave him a super healthy body. He spoke with the goddess of the harvest and gave him a mighty agricultural tool.
A few moments later.
A few seconds later, Hiraku woke up in his new life. Now he had a healthy and energetic body. However, the god made another mistake and sent him literally to the most dangerous forest in the entire realm. He didn't mind. Hiraku started to test his new abilities and noticed that by merely thinking of a tool, it would appear in his hands. He thought this might be the powerful agricultural tool the god had mentioned. Without further thought, he got to work building a shelter. As he did, he realized that while using the tools, he felt no fatigue at all. Minutes later, he noticed that the forest might be full of dangerous creatures, so he decided to find a place to rest. He walked for a while until he came across the forest's most beautiful treasure, the giant tree. Upon reaching the spot, he thought of a shovel, and it appeared in his hand. With it, he began to dig a well for water, and after a few attempts, he succeeded. The only problem was a tree in the way where he planned to grow some vegetables. He thought of a tool to cut it, and instantly had an axe in his hand. Our friend made his move, but to his surprise, with a single swing, he cut the tree as if it were a cake. I don't think here we were aware of his true power. With all the wood he obtained from the tree, he thought about building a cabin. However, the day was about to end, and he realized he didn't have a campfire. That's when he thought of a lighter, but nothing happened. That's when he realized he could only materialize tools related to agriculture. So he thought of a magnifying glass. I don't know what a magnifying glass had to do with agriculture, but oh well.
I don't even know.
At night, Hiraku spent all the hours crafting cups and plates from the wood he had cut, and the next morning, the first thing he did was light a campfire. He knew that as long as he used agricultural tools, he wouldn't feel hunger or fatigue. But if he engaged in other activities, he would. So he thought about getting some food, and just as he did, a rabbit leaped at him to attack. With no other choice, Hiraku had to defend himself, and as a result, he obtained some delicious skewers. After eating, he built a bath and began preparing the fields to cultivate his precious vegetables. However, he realized a small problem: he had no seeds to plant. But the next morning, he noticed something incredible. Without the need for seeds, the plants began to grow. Hiraku believed it was all thanks to his omnipotent technique, so he decided to devote all his efforts to caring for the plants. He started by building a fence and then a kind of trap to prevent other animals, like rabbits, from entering his garden. One day, while tending to his garden, 2 large dogs appeared. Since he had always wanted one, he let them into the farm and fed them with the meat of a boar he had hunted. He noticed that one of the dogs was about to give birth, so he gave them his cabin to stay safe. The next day, the puppies were born, and to celebrate, Hiraku gave them the best meat he had. Hiraku thought the dogs would leave after having the puppies, but the opposite happened. They decided to stay and now helped him hunt and protect the garden. As they were now his friends, Hiraku decided to name them Kuro and Yuki. After a few days, the vegetables finally began to grow, and everyone enjoyed them. For introverts, this life was a paradise. Hiraku realized that when using the omnipotent technique, he only needed to think of the fruit or vegetable he needed, and the plant would automatically grow. Furthermore, one day he noticed that horns were starting to grow on the dogs' foreheads, and he would soon discover why. That same week, while exploring the forest, he finally found a river. He devised a plan to connect the river to his house. However, with the arrival of winter and the increasing cold, Hiraku tried to make coats from rabbit fur, but the smell was unbearable. The solution came when Kuro introduced him to a friend, a large spider who curiously could create high-quality clothing with her abilities. Hiraku gave her potatoes, and she made him coats. It was an excellent deal. Everything seemed perfect, but something was missing: the presence of girls.
Where are the girls?
However, one day Hiraku noticed that the dogs ventured into the forest on their own, leading him to believe it was time for them to go and build their own homes. But in reality, the dogs went to find their mates. Additionally, the spider Zabuton had given birth. All of this delighted our friend, but somehow he felt a bit jealous because he had no one. Just like you and me. One day, while Hiraku was busy on the farm, Zabuton activated the alarm to alert that there were intruders. When Hiraku went to investigate, he found a young girl who asked for his help. Without hesitation, he approached her, but it turned out to be a trap. The girl jumped on him, bit his neck, and transformed into an adult. However, her plan didn't last long as the dogs attacked her and left her without energy. Hiraku asked her why she was there, to which she replied that she was investigating the forest. When she encountered the dogs, she tried to attack them, but they proved stronger than her. Hiraku didn't think the vampire was a bad person, so he offered to let her bite him to regain her original form. He then took her to the gardens and showed her all his crops. The vampire, named Lu, was captivated by the taste of the tomatoes. That night, Lu told Hiraku the reason she was in the forest. She was a scientist researching some plants, but the locals had tried to steal her research. She left, but they tracked her down in the forest. Therefore, she asked Hiraku if she could stay in the place for a while. Excited, Hiraku told Lu that she could stay as long as she wanted and live with him forever. Throughout his life, he had found it difficult to connect with others. When he arrived in this place, he was enchanted by the tranquility, but he realized that he couldn't go without company for so long, without someone to talk to. Lu listened to his words and blushed, as Hiraku didn't know that, in that world, when you said I want you to stay with me forever, you meant something different. Hiraku, realizing it, also blushed but still asked Lu to stay, and she happily accepted.
Sensational.
Days later, trouble began when the intruder alarm sounded. They encountered an angel girl, the same one who had been chasing Lu. Hiraku helped the angel girl, named Tia, and asked her if she served God. In that world, angels were a warrior race. Tia explained that she had been pursuing Lu due to the high reward on her head. But now that she was lost in that forest, catching her no longer made sense. During the night, as the three of them conversed, Tia asked Lu who Hiraku was, to which she replied that he was her husband.
You made it.
As they chatted, Lu suggested that it would be good for Tia to stay and live in the place, as they needed more help. At first, Tia wasn't too thrilled about the idea, as she thought angels shouldn't get their hands dirty. However, as she got to know the place better and tasted the fruits, she was delighted and agreed to help. Furthermore, Lu asked her to stay because she alone couldn't handle Hiraku's immense energy. Wink wink. The small village continued to grow, and the three of them knew they needed more help. One day, Tia told Hiraku that she would be leaving for a while but would return. And she did. But not alone, she returned with a group of elves.
Oh, this place is paradise!
Tia explained that due to disputes in their lands, her people had been forced to flee and had been homeless for a long time. She thought it would be a good idea for them to stay and assist with all the tasks. Hiraku, with his immense heart, welcomed them and allowed them to stay. The elves turned out to be skilled in construction, and in just 10 days, with the help of Hiraku and his construction abilities, they built a large cabin. They also created a forge for smelting metal and baking bread. Hiraku was amazed by all their skills, and the leader of the elves, Rhea, explained that they couldn't afford to go over 300 years without learning anything. During a nighttime conversation, the girls remarked on how strong Hiraku was, unaware that he had tamed the infernal wolves and a giant spider, extremely powerful creatures. One day, the protagonist encountered a giant queen bee that Zabuton had captured with the intention of having it eat some plants. Although it seemed dangerous, the bee refused to attack due to its fear of Zabuton. Therefore, the protagonist decided to keep the bee and built a small house for its nest near the garden. Unlike the queen bee, the worker bees were of normal size and built a large nest in the little house in just 10 days. The protagonist also constructed a huge pond to draw water from the river through a canal. However, instead of using wood for the canal, which could lead to leaks, he used his omnipotent agricultural tool to compact the earth perfectly, creating material as strong as concrete. With the leftover soil from digging the pond, Hiraku made the necessary pieces to assemble the canal. With the help of the elves, they worked diligently to quickly build the canal, and in record time, they had a water connection from the river to the pond. The protagonist was delighted to see that even fish came to the pond, as they hadn't managed to catch any before. However, Lulu was a little worried when she saw that Hiraku was cooking the fish from the death forest, as she had no idea if they were safe to eat. Therefore, they decided to let him try them first to see if they were safe. After a while, they noticed they tasted like salmon, so he offered them to the girls, and everyone loved them. With the waterway built, our friend told the girls that their next goal was to build a rice field. He quickly filled the fields with water, and all the girls helped him plant the rice while Zabuton's offspring took care of keeping pests away. The rice plants grew much faster than he expected, so they harvested the rice and left it out in the sun to dry. Once it had lost all its moisture, they began threshing it and removing any leaves or plant material. After a lengthy process, the rice grains were ready. Hiraku cooked them and made rice balls filled with the fish he had cooked earlier. These rice balls were a hit among all the girls, to the point where they didn't even leave him any.
But you can't do this to me.
I started this company. You know how much I sacrificed?
Hiraku continued working in the rice fields over the next few days, always ending up covered in mud. He decided to build a place for hot baths, and construction began immediately. In no time, they crafted the ovens to heat the water, built a washing area, and a very large bathtub with a wastewater solution. Tia recommended using slime since they feed on waste products and dead organic matter, and then purify the water. Essentially, they were nature's cleaning machines. The protagonist attracted several slime and tossed them into a purification pool he had built for wastewater, thus solving that issue. While Hiraku was gathering firewood, he noticed a small mushroom on a piece of wood. Since he couldn't differentiate between the world's mushrooms, he came up with an idea. He used his omnipotent agricultural tool on 2 logs to cultivate mushrooms he was familiar with. After completing this, he finally decided to try the bath he had built. After showing the girls how it worked, he got into the bathtub. It had been a long time since he could enjoy a bath, as he couldn't bathe while he was in the hospital in his previous life. Stepping into the hot water, he sank into a state of complete relaxation and happiness. However, his relaxation was interrupted when the other girls entered the bathtub, making it impossible for him to relax as he had hoped. Even though he proposed the idea of building a men-only bath the next day, the girls opposed the idea of him having a bath all to himself. One day later, Hiraku discovered that his mushroom cultivation had been a success, so he decided to make a stew. Before he could start, the dogs caught his attention because they had found a group of 5 elves and brought them to his property. Leah explained that they lived in the same village and were around 200 years old. Our friend agreed to let them live there as well, and they all decided to start building an even larger house. On another note, it tells the story of Kuro and Yuki, who were attacked while living in the forest. When Yuki was pregnant, they were attacked by a creature known as the Fighting Bear. By sheer luck, the bear didn't devour them, but they were severely wounded and weakened, unable to stand. After living with Hiraku, they realized he wasn't just a weak human but possessed unlimited power through his tool. Kuro's concern is that Hiraku doesn't seem to realize that they are not ordinary dogs, but terrifying monsters known as hellhounds. After several days, the new house is finally complete, much larger than the previous ones, with a basement for storing food and firewood. Hiraku decides to carve 2 wooden statues of his dogs to place them at the entrance of the house. When everything is ready in the new house, Hiraku attempts to prepare a new dish the girls haven't tried before, so he decides to make curry, something they had never heard of. With the help of Tia and Lucy, he collects the necessary spices to make curry from the fields he had been working on since earlier. However, when he finishes gathering what he needs, he notices that the girls have disappeared. Hiraku returns to the house, and the only one who helps him cook is Leah, who explains that Lulu and the other girls are busy with some research. While they cook, the aromas of the food attract the other girls and even the dogs, who had been watching from a distance at sunset. Tia and Lulu return, and the curry is finally ready. So, everyone gathers to eat, as expected. They all love it so much that once again, they eat everything and leave nothing. The next day, everyone begins to prepare for the impending winter, as they will spend most of their time indoors. The protagonist takes care of storing enough firewood in the basement and orders extra blankets in advance. While the elves work on the forge and other projects, Tia and Lulu are in charge of preserving food for the winter. Since the dogs can't hunt well during the winter, they want to store as much meat as possible. Hiraku also creates snow storage to preserve the vegetables during the winter. When he sees the girls using magic to work, he thinks about how useful it would be to use magic, although he knows that he alone can't do it. In the evening, he talks to Lulu, who explains that she can't use magic without studying it, even if it's basic magic. Despite trying many times, she was never able to do it. Nevertheless, the protagonist expresses how happy he is to have the girls help, as they are amazing, and all he has been doing is working in the garden and cooking. Hearing this, Lulu makes him feel better by saying that he is the most amazing one in that place because no one else has managed to live in that forest for so long the way he has, making him the first and only one to achieve it. When winter arrives, Hiraku carves wood to make board games, as they need entertainment while at home. After explaining the rules of the games, most of the girls start playing, showing their competitive side. Even Kuro helps in some games and plays a chess match against Yuki. However, Hiraku is surprised that the dogs understand the rules and, though they seem adorable at first glance, he feels a terrifying energy coming from them. Therefore, he decides not to challenge or approach them. Lulu also tries to play against the dogs but ends up with a resounding defeat. Hiraku also plays chess against the girls and tries to avenge Lulu, but like her, he ends up being completely defeated. So, he decides to play a mini bowling game he had built. Even in that game, the girls outperform him. That's how they spent the winter together in a very warm and playful atmosphere. The days pass faster than expected, and soon the snow melts and spring returns. When the weather gets warmer, Hiraku goes out of the house to feed Zabuton some potatoes. However, before he can do anything, they hear the alarm repeatedly sounding. Thanks to the number of hits, Hiraku manages to locate the direction from which the intruder is approaching. Then, they look in that direction and see a huge creature moving swiftly across the sky. Hiraku asks if it's a dragon, but Tia tells him very concerned that it's a Weber. The beast prepares to attack, so Tia and Lulu create a magical defense. Both manage to create a huge barrier that protects the entire area, including the great tree. Nevertheless, several flaming debris fall near the fields, and the elves take care of extinguishing the fire. Tia asks if they should attack, but Lulu admits she's not even sure if they can penetrate the Weber's barrier, and they can't escape either because the beast would follow them from the sky. Hiraku despairs, not knowing what to do, just like the girls, as the threatening weaver seems to have no plans to leave and completely ignores them. In the midst of tension, Hiraku tells himself that the most important thing is to protect everyone, and surprisingly, his omnipotent farming tool transforms into a powerful spear. Despite not fully understanding what is happening, Hiraku doesn't waste time and decides to use the spear against the weaver. The beast creates 3 protective barriers to withstand the attack, but Hiraku's spear shatters them completely. It pierces one of the barriers and returns to the protagonist's hand, who without hesitation throws it with great force again. This time, the spear pierces through the weaver's chest, causing it to fall in the forest. When it's all over, the girls are left speechless, completely surprised. Despite some damage to the fields, all the buildings are fine. They decide to go see the weaver's corpse in the forest, where Hiraku asks if there are many of these beasts. Lulu replies that they do exist but only in the areas where they live, and it's very rare to encounter one as large as the one they just faced. With some seriousness, Hiraku asks if there's any chance someone might have sent that specific weaver to attack them. Tia tells him it's unlikely since even if that weaver were under someone's command, it wouldn't act on its own. More likely, it was a wild creature acting alone. Hiraku comes to the conclusion that it was an unfortunate and strange accident. Despite creating a tense atmosphere, all the seriousness from our friend disappears when he asks if they can eat the weaver. Shortly after, they return home and enjoy a feast with the weaver's meat. Hiraku prepares seasoned steak, steamed meatballs, and even a vegetable stew made with the weaver's tail meat. To everyone's surprise, the meat turns out to be very tender and full of flavor, leaving everyone delighted with the meal. During dinner, Lucy discreetly asks Tia if she could have blocked the attack of the spear that Hiraku used earlier. Tia replies seriously that it's impossible since it went through 3 layers of the weaver's barriers, and then penetrated its chest. Both girls conclude that they were lucky to find Kuro and the dogs when they first arrived in the forest. On the other hand, it shows us the Demon King's castle in the Demon Kingdom of Galgardo. There, Random and Gra, 2 of the 4 great generals of the Demon King, discuss the report they received about the fallen weaver. None of them can believe that a beast was killed in such a way, as the mere presence of a weaver is enough to mobilize all their forces. They explain that according to the report, the huge weaver was attacked from the ground and killed with just 2 hits. The other 2 generals are incredulous and even panic at the information, claiming they can't fight against something like that. The calmest of the 3 declares that before fear and panic spread among the citizens, like the 4 generals, they must address the situation. Nevertheless, Random suggests as a solution to resign and leaves without further ado. Elsewhere, we find ourselves in Dreamer's lair, where a huge dragon named Dream converses with his companion, Gucci. After witnessing the fall of the weaver, the dragon asks Gucci what he thinks would happen if he were attacked in the same way. Gucci doesn't hesitate to say that it would most likely pass through him cleanly. Therefore, it would be foolish to attack. While the news of the weaver's fall causes panic in other places, Hiraku calmly wonders the next day what will happen with the weaver's meat. He decides to make wine with the grape crops he has, and the girls enthusiastically help him, as apparently wine exists in this world and is highly appreciated. After harvesting many grapes, the girls place them in something the protagonist specifically built for that purpose. Meanwhile, he takes care of changing the barrels as they fill up. These barrels were made by the high elf Lacha, as she knows how to make airtight containers. The girls start stomping on the grapes, but Tia accidentally falls. The elves suggest singing a song they used to sing in their village while working together, which helps them coordinate and enjoy the process more. Lulu also joins, pulling the protagonist along with her. After a lot of work and fun, they end up with a total of 16 barrels by sunset. Meanwhile, the god of the world observes them and shows the goddess of agriculture how the protagonist is having fun. He asks her to forgive him. However, the goddess of agriculture gets angry and refuses to forgive the god because he mistakenly punished the soul of an innocent human and tried to secretly save him by sending him to the dreadful forest of death. Furthermore, he gave him a replica of the sacred green spear. The god tries to justify himself, saying that for now, he only uses it as an agricultural tool, and the goddess gave him permission. However, the goddess scolds him, saying she never gave him permission to give it to a human. Even more enraged, she tells the god that the spear should drain all of Hiraku's life force, killing him instantly. The god, feeling quite embarrassed, tells her that Hiraku is fine, and he probably has super fast recovery abilities due to the healthy body he gave him. Nevertheless, the goddess tells the god that, apparently, his father was quite careless, so as punishment, he'll have to sit in the same place for 300 years. Back with our friend, after hearing the alarm, he encounters a small vampire in the forest. Once again, Lulu is surprised to see her and recognizes her as Fiora, her sister. Shortly afterward, they bring her home, and Fiora explains that after learning that an infamous angel was chasing Lulu, she decided to follow her here. The protagonist tells her she's already here and can relax and stay with them for a while. Looking at him, she comments that she finds it hard to believe he's her sister's husband, as something doesn't add up. However, upon feeling the chilling gaze of Kuro, Fiora gets scared and retracts everything she said. Lulu clarifies that Hiraku is the one in charge in this place and is the master of all those infernal wolves she saw. Furthermore, she understands that, under normal circumstances, she apologizes for her rude behavior. Despite that, Hiraku tells her not to worry. Changing the subject, Hiraku turns to Kuro and asks him if they are really wolves. In response, Kuro barks, and at that moment, he releases a huge red flame from his mouth. Our friend applauds in amazement. Meanwhile, Lulu can't believe that he has been living with them all this time without knowing that they are quite well-known magical beasts. In the evening, the protagonist prepares a nice dinner for Fiora as an apology for what Kuro and the wolves put her through. As expected, she is delighted with the food, just like Lulu. who initially takes a lot of notes for her research. After a few days staying there, Fiora leaves in a hurry and excitement to make preparations for her move. A month later, she returns, bringing with her a bunch of maids from a race of ogres. One of them introduces herself as Aniem, the representative of all the maids, and says they are at their service. The protagonist clarifies that they don't have to be so formal and asks Fiora about the cows they brought. She says they are regular cows, and she made sure to bring cows that produce milk. Hiraku gets excited, saying they can now make butter and cheese. Meanwhile, Tia notices that there are already many different races living there in great numbers, while she is the only angel. This discourages her noticeably, so she quickly approaches Hiraku and informs him that she will leave for a while. Shortly after, Tia returns with her subordinates, Gran Maria, Cudel, and Coron, 3 angels in serious-looking armor with large weapons. Also, a group of lizardmen, represented by someone named Daga, brings a chicken in a cage. The protagonist asks if the chicken breathes fire, somewhat suspicious, but Tia assures him that the chicken they brought only lays eggs. Our friend thanks her, making the girls very happy. Thanks to everyone, the place where they live has become much more civilized. The professional maids take care of cleaning the rooms and keeping the house tidy, as well as cooking. However, they only know how to make fairly simple dishes, so the protagonist teaches them all the cooking methods he knows. All the girls enjoy cooking a lot, and in no time, they learn to prepare more elaborate dishes. On the other hand, the 3 angels Tia brought with her are responsible for patrolling different regions of the forest, making sure to monitor any movement. This decision was made after the Weaver attack, as Tia decided that the 3 of them would act as security for the facility. Meanwhile, the lizardmen handle all the outdoor labor that requires strength, and thanks to them, the construction progresses even faster than before. The protagonist thinks about all the people who now live there and realizes he can't even count them all. Just then, Lil approaches and informs him that he has brought all the high elves who were still wandering in the forest. Seeing so many girls, the protagonist asks if there are no men, but Lil explains that there weren't any men who survived back then. Nevertheless, he assures him it's okay because they can start making them soon without asking any questions. The protagonist wishes them luck and decides not to question how they will do that. A few days later, Hiraku gathers the different representatives of all the races and tells them he wants to come up with a name for the place where they live. He explains that initially, it was just his small cabin in the farmlands, but then more buildings started to emerge and more people began to move in. Currently, it's like a village, so he wants to give it a name, and suggests naming it after the forest they are in. But the protagonist dismisses the idea upon hearing it's called the Forest of Death, as it sounds too terrifying. Someone else suggests calling it the Village of Death, but that sounds even worse and is also discarded. Finally, Sabuton raises his paw and points to the huge door of the house. Without fully understanding, Hiraku opens the door and there he sees the enormous tree that has always been there. Therefore, the name of the place where he has been living is officially named the Village of the Great Tree. In the evening, the protagonist reveals the name to all the inhabitants and has a big celebration to commemorate it, using the first batch of wine they made in the village. Everyone gets excited and starts calling him the mayor, but Hiraku says that's something they'll decide later. Nonetheless, Lucy tells him that he's the only one who can be the mayor, and seeing everyone in agreement, they call him that. He feels very happy and decides to enjoy the life he's had up to that point, celebrating with great joy and ready to do his best as the mayor. The village continues to prosper, although as the mayor, Hiraku continues to work just as he always has. One day, he hears Sabuton's alarm, and one of the angels on patrol quickly approaches to inform him that a messenger from the Demon Kingdom has arrived. Tia and Lucy accompany the protagonist to see the messenger, and they meet Bissell, who introduces himself and says he would like to have an audience with the person in charge of the place. Hiraku introduces himself as the mayor, so Bissell presents him with a gift to commemorate their meeting. Then, he informs him that he has a message from the Demon King, as he would like to discuss the situation of their settlement. The protagonist recalls what Lucy told him about the Demon King and deduces that they want him to pay taxes for all the time he has lived on that land. After thinking it over, Hiraku gathers his courage and takes care of his duties as the mayor. Finally, he tells Bissell that if the Demon King is willing to accept their residence in that land, he is willing to offer a portion of their harvest as a tax, paying a rate of 10%. Upon hearing this, Bissell is surprised, and the protagonist worries that he may have set the rate too low. To his surprise, Bissell nervously asks if he's sure about that. The protagonist confirms that he is and clarifies that they would like them to come to collect the payment every year before winter. Bissell accepts, concluding the agreement much faster than the protagonist expected. Hiraku signs the agreement, establishing that the tax they will pay will be 10% of their total harvest each year. However, this is limited to what they cultivate in the fields, so it won't include anything they produce like milk, eggs, honey, or alcohol. If the people from the Demon Kingdom are interested in any of those items, they will have trade negotiations. The protagonist felt he may have been too aggressive in the negotiations and ends up giving a gift to Bissell. Before saying goodbye, Lucy praises Hiraku for how he handled the tax situation and mentions that now, with the taxes paid, they are technically under the protection of the Demon King. Tia comments on how impressive the 10% rate is, as usually it's supposed to be around 50% or 60%. Annie also mentions that the idea of collecting annually was a very good decision because it forces them to officially acknowledge their residence in that place. Furthermore, if they only come to collect once a year, they won't be able to accurately measure everything they produce. In other words, they practically bought the protection of the Demon King with a much lower 10% real tax. Lucy gets excited about all of this and mentions that she gave them the all-powerful medicine that works whether it's ingested or applied directly to a wound, something apparently very valuable. Meanwhile, in the Demon King's castle, the generals speak with Bissell and can't believe that the village of the Great Tree has submitted to their military forces, even when they have the strength to defeat a Weber. Random can't believe it either and is sure they have some hidden motive. Bissell clarifies that he had the same suspicion but had no other choice than to accept their conditions. After all, the Vampire Princess and the Angel of Annihilation were right there with the mayor. Brad is shocked to hear this and asks fearfully if he means the great sage Lucy and the strongest of all angels. Bissell confirms this and explains that it's not all. There was also an army of high elves and a pack of infernal wolves. In addition to the group that led them to their leader was the trio of assassin angels. All of this made him think that his life was over. Despite all of that, the mayor suggested that they be under the protection of the Demon King, something he couldn't refuse, or else they would have become an enemy force. The generals begin to tremble with fear, but their attention is drawn to the gift that Hiraku presented. Upon opening it, they find apples and other fruits they've never tasted before. The first one to try them is surprised by the delicious taste. However, Bissell's attention is drawn to the cloth that wraps the apples, and with terror, he realizes it belongs to a great demon spider, a dangerous creature that the previous Demon Kings once battled. Upon hearing this, Random stands up and leaves once again, resigning. On the other hand, in a short time, the village of the Great Tree receives another visit from the one and only ruler of the dragons, Dreamer. The great dragon lowers its head as a sign of respect, while his assistant presents a gift to Hiraku, an elegant cape that seems to be of great value. Hiraku thanks them but asks for the reason for their visit. Gucci explains that his master has his lair located south of that place, and even though there is quite a distance, they consider them neighbors, so they decided to offer a formal greeting. Hiraku invites them inside, and the enormous dragon takes on human form and nervously introduces himself to the protagonist. However, Dreamer relaxes completely, exclaiming that this place is great, as well as its liquor, so he plans to stay there. Gucci clarifies to Hiraku that he can't do that, as many people will get upset without protecting their home. Shortly afterward, they both leave with apples as gifts that Heracles provided. Hiraku thinks about how the village of the Great Tree will deal with the visitors, as everything starts to get more complicated with diplomatic relations. In a few days, the protagonist decides to build a guest house for visitors since he doesn't feel comfortable inviting them to his own home. The elves construct a large house with a capacity of 30 people, as there may be large groups of visitors. To avoid scaring visitors, they give Sabuton a bell so he can distinguish whether an approaching presence is a visitor or an enemy. Additionally, they establish a welcome group made up of several people to receive visitors and monitor them in case an enemy infiltrates by posing as a visitor. Meanwhile, Fiora will be in charge of watching over visitors who stay until nightfall since, being a vampire, she has no trouble staying awake for several days. All the preparations are put into practice sooner than expected since shortly afterward, they receive a visit from a group of beastmen from a place called Howler Village. Gas, one of them, clarifies that they want to establish relations with the village of the Great Tree. After welcoming them properly, they listen to what they have to say. The group explains that their village has been facing recent issues, which have affected trade between the two places. For this reason, they are seeking new trading partners and came there because they heard that someone from the Demon King's people had been talking about their village. The next day, Garf speaks to the protagonist and tells him they have products made from the mineral they extract in their village, such as paints, silverware, glassware, and more. They would like to exchange these products for food. Upon seeing all that he is offered, the protagonist gets excited and is willing to give them all their harvests in exchange. This marks the beginning of the trade relationship with the Howler Village. In exchange for a barrel of wine, Dime agrees to transport them and carry the merchandise. Days later, they return from the Howler Village after exchanging all the products. Tia reports that the mayor of the Howler Village asked if some of his people could come to live in the village of the Great Tree. In total, about 20 women arrive, but more people are still needed to work. Hiraku agrees with the condition that they send at least 2 young men since the population is already almost entirely female. Days later, the new residents arrive, but when they present the 3 young men they brought, the protagonist realizes there has been a misunderstanding as they turn out to be small children. Nevertheless, he has no choice but to welcome them to his village. In a short time, the new inhabitants adapt to the village, although some of the new girls still faint upon seeing Sabuton and the wolves. Hiraku notices that one of them has magic and realizes that absolutely everyone in that place can use magic, including Sabuton, the giant bee, and the slime. Once again, he comments that he is the only one who cannot do it. But one of the new girls tries to cheer him up by saying that children cannot use magic either because they haven't learned. Hiraku thinks to himself that even they will surpass him in a short time. but he still focuses on the things he can do. Suddenly, the sound of an explosion and a tremor distracts him, and in a short time, Gran Maria appears and informs him that a grappler and a blondie viper are planning something in the northern area of the forest. The ground keeps shaking stronger, which worries Gran Maria a lot because, if it continues, it could affect the village, and it would be very dangerous to get involved without a plan. The protagonist thinks it over calmly and, after a few seconds, asks Gran Maria if these creatures that are fighting eat angel meat. She tells him they do. Therefore, we see Hiraku flying, who, despite the apparent danger, simply comments that he has always wondered what bear meat tastes like. Upon arrival, he finds a giant snake fighting against the enormous king fighter bear. He proposes to bring it down immediately, but Hiraku tells him to just let him down. Quickly, the angel obeys, and thus Hiraku easily defeats the beasts with his lance. Upon seeing the corpse of the enormous bear that once attacked him, Kuro remains watching, apparently overwhelmed by realizing the protagonist's immense power. The three angels also stay completely incredulous since not even they could take down such a monster with a single strike. When they return home, the protagonist prepares a wine stew with bear meat and fries the snake meat, which turns out to be delicious. A few days later, a group of elderly dwarves, freed by a man named Donovan, arrive as visitors. Donovan mentions that they've heard there's high-quality alcohol in the village of the Great Tree and they would like them to share some of their wine in exchange. The dwarves offer to make alcohol using other products from the field since they have spent their lives studying alcohol production and have the necessary technology. This convinces the girls, and Donovan and his men get to work producing alcohol. After completing the entire process, Donovan gives the protagonist some freshly distilled whiskey, which surprises him with its strength. Then, Donovan and his men end up staying in the village and working as brewers. Therefore, the protagonist throws a celebration party with the new alcohol, and even Daim attends, ending up drunk as usual. A few days later, the alarm goes off, and the protagonist prepares to attack with his lance when he sees a dragon that doesn't seem friendly approaching directly. Before he can do anything, Dreamer strikes the dragon to push it away. However, a third dragon appears flying straight towards the protagonist, who has no choice but to prepare for his second attack. But before he can do so, someone asks him to stop. Then, Daim appears in his human form alongside Graffelin, his wife, and their daughter. Dreamer explains that his frequent visits to the village of the Great Tree raised suspicions at his home because he always brought valuable gifts to the village and spent the night in the guest house so as not to return home drunk. When the misunderstanding is cleared up, Dreamer's wife and daughter apologize to the protagonist, and the dragon family discusses how intimidating Hiraku's village is. Dreamer's wife comments that she never thought she would meet someone with the strength to overpower them. Lastimo agrees and mentions that her mother couldn't even defend against the previous dragon attack. She had to dodge it. Her mother tells her that it was because of the spider, who is an old friend of hers. If she hadn't removed it from their path at that moment, she probably wouldn't be alive as they can't ignore that kind of power. Dreamer's wife tells Lastimon that she will have to live in the village of the Great Tree for a while to ensure that this power never turns against them. The dragons, unable to argue, accept, and Lastimon becomes a resident of the village of the Great Tree. The protagonist introduces her and asks her what she should do. In a short time, she begins working in the village. Due to her monstrous dragon strength, almost everything she does ends in disaster. But after thinking for a bit, the protagonist finds the perfect job for the girl, putting her in charge of the village diplomatic relations. This is because everyone is afraid of dragons, who, in addition to their power, are also incredibly wise. Hiraku discovers that appointing Lastimon to this role works perfectly, as when Bissell visited the village to buy oranges, he ended up buying a lot of fruits because Lastimon appeared so intimidating without even trying. Bissell returns to the Demon King's castle and informs the other generals that the village of the Great Tree now has dragons, and due to the constant growth of their military power, they need to keep them under surveillance, being cautious not to let them discover it, or they might consider it an act of aggression. With no other options, Bissell comes up with a plan, and shortly after, he decides to send his daughter Florin to live in the village to investigate without raising suspicions. Despite the girl's initial confidence that it wouldn't be a big deal, she quickly realizes the immense military power of the village, and her confidence deserts her. Nevertheless, she decides to continue working in the village and becomes friends with Lastimon. In a short time, as autumn arrives, everyone enjoys the food more. One day, while having a stew with the girls, the protagonist mentions how delicious it would be to get seafood like cod, crabs, or monkfish. This catches the attention of everyone, who quickly inquire about what he means by seafood. Hiraku explains that it refers to marine products like fish and seafood that could enhance stews and other dishes. Fiora starts researching what he said, and Tia wonders if crabs can actually be eaten because they are tough and wild. Despite their doubts, excitement takes over and they set out immediately. Florin mentions to the protagonist that there is a port city within the bounds of the demon realm, to the south of the village, where they do a lot of trade with oceanic products. They could get fish and seafood there. She could ask for help from a merchant she knows and offer to fly them there. They both depart promptly. 3 days later, they return with Michael, the president of the company. After his introduction and the display of the seafood products he brought from the city of Chachado, Michael gets quite direct with his visit. He clarifies that his goal is to suggest more opportunities to start doing business. Additionally, he proposes becoming the official governmental supplier for the village of the Great Tree. This means he wants to handle all the trade between them and the outside world because he can fetch more valuable fish by exchanging their valuable products. And let's take a look at the list of products that Michael's company manages. After discussing several important matters, Michael departs again to his city, being carried by Lastamount. Everyone comments that Michael seems to be a skilled merchant and will be of great help in the negotiations, especially if they end up getting more benefits from trading. Michael did seem to be a more skillful and composed merchant, but once he gets far enough from the village, he shows all the fear he had been hiding, quite relieved to have survived and completed the deal with such a terrifying group. He leaves happily, as it's the best deal of his life. After all that, the protagonist and the girls finally try authentic seafood, and it turns out to be so delicious that Hiraku thinks about ordering shrimp or squid next time. Some time later, for the third time, a dragon attacks the village, and the squad of 3 angels couldn't stop it. The protagonist watches the dragon with great alertness, wondering if it is related to Dreamer. However, the dragon remains motionless for a few seconds, only gazing at the protagonist and then launching a fireball into the forest, showcasing its power and practically challenging him. Therefore, Hiraku uses his lance and in a few seconds brings down the dragon, causing it to fall into the forest. When he investigates, he finds a girl who admits defeat and surrenders nonchalantly. The protagonist asks why she set the forest on fire, but the girl can't come up with any excuse. Nevertheless, Dreamer appears concerned and apologizes to Hiraku, explaining that she is Kakurin, his older sister. Hakurin says it's all Dreamer's fault because he told her that he would someday offer Lastamount as a wife to the mayor of the village of the Great Tree, to which Dreamer protests that he probably said something like that while drunk, which doesn't surprise Hiraku at all. Hiraku asks if she couldn't visit normally, but Hakurin replies that she wanted to play a little with him because everyone talks about how strong he is. Additionally, she wanted to vent her frustration as she can't believe her little niece, who is 900 years younger, is finding a husband before her. The protagonist reprimands her, saying that even if she wants to play, she can't cause trouble for people. After being scolded, Hakurin has no choice but to clean up the mess she caused. Days later, Hakurin settles easily into the village, eating nonchalantly with Dream, as if they were in their own home. Lastamount apologizes for her aunt's behavior, as she is causing many problems, but the protagonist assures her that there's no need to apologize. After the meal, Hakurin mentions that she's heard they have quite fun board games in this place, so she asks the protagonist to play a few rounds. Shortly after, Hakurin, Dream, and, of course, the protagonist decide to play Mangaini. At the Dragon Clan's request, they have a bet that states the loser has to remove an item of clothing as punishment. Upon seeing the dangerous competitiveness of the dragons, Hiraku worries, having a feeling that it will all go wrong. Soon, his concerns grow as he realizes the dragons really hate to lose, leading to a very intense round of Mangaini. After several games, the protagonist's worries become a reality as he's the only one left with a single piece of clothing. To his dismay, he loses the final game and is forced to carry out his punishment. Meanwhile, in the Demon King's castle, the generals also become filled with worry when they receive reports that the ancient dragon Hakurin has been seen in the village of the Great Tree. Now, she has enough power to conquer a country thanks to Altera. They inquire whether it's okay to do nothing, but Demon King Golgardo doesn't even show interest in the matter. He remarks that his daughter has been in a bad mood lately because she hasn't said anything all day, apart from good morning, and he fears she's in her rebellious phase. Cratch tries to get back on topic and warns that they need to focus on preparing their military forces immediately. However, when he tries to speak with Randall, he realizes that he has run away, leaving only a half-written resignation letter. On the other hand, after attacking the village of the Great Tree, Hakurin decides to stay, since she's good at it. She becomes a teacher in the village, teaching reading, writing, and mathematics to the children. A few girls visit the village with treasures and ask for their lives to be spared. They explain that, at some point, Kiro's children decided to clear out a dungeon they found in the middle of the forest, so the Lamias were forced to flee their homes quickly. Although the wolves didn't know what they were doing, they caused them many problems. Therefore, Hiraku decides to exchange the precious gems the Lamias mined for some of their crops. The protagonist tells them that they'd like them to keep trading, and very pleased with this, the girls returned to their original homes. Afterward, the Lamias formed the Lamia Delivery Service and started transporting the village's commercial products, becoming trusted neighbors. With this increased trade with other cities and areas, the village reaches a new level, so Hiraku decides to expand and plant even more crops. On the other hand, in a castle, 3 girls discuss the military power that the village of the Great Tree is accumulating, possibly planning something very bad. They comment that they are surely convincing Florin to stay there so they can use her as a hostage if needed. Therefore, they ask the princess to start gathering their troops immediately before it's too late. The princess agrees, saying they must defeat that village and save Florin. Meanwhile, Florin works quietly in her office, as she is responsible for the village's accounting. Her father, Vice, visits her. Shortly afterward, Vissel informs Florin that the Demon King's daughter, Princess Yuri, is gathering troops and preparing for a military campaign. Florin is surprised and asks why the princess would do something so absurd. Vissel explains that since she left, some followers have taken advantage to fill the princess's head with half-truths. By followers, Florin is referring to the 3 daughters of very important people, who, according to her, are like a trio of politically powerful idiots. Vissel reveals that the place they plan to attack is the village of the Great Tree, which alarms Florin. She exclaims that they should know how ridiculously powerful that village is after all the reports she has sent. Her father explains that the reports seemed so ridiculous that they began to appear unrealistic, and although he tried to get the Demon King to stop it, he's too soft on his daughter, so he did nothing. He says that the princess's troops will mobilize the next day, and their forces amount to 300 men. Florin clarifies to her father that she can't stop the princess herself because, if she does, she will be considered an enemy of the Demon Kingdom. Therefore, it's better to ask someone from the village to defeat the princess's forces, and they will give up and go home. However, they also can't let everyone know about this situation because it could end with the violent destruction of the Demon Kingdom. Basically, Florin has to show the troops the differences between military power without actually mobilizing the village's forces. The next day, the protagonist and the girls of the village are in charge of demonstrating their monstrous strength to the princess's soldiers, creating effortless chaos. In seconds, absolutely all the soldiers surrender in terror, begging for their lives. The Lamias are surprised by how easy it was, asking if they will really give them 10 boxes of apples just for that. After witnessing this, the 3 noble girls who initiated everything show up in the village. Florin explains to Hiraku that they will live in the village. In a threatening manner, in front of the girls, she tells them that they will work as if their lives depend on it. In addition to the 3 girls, Princess Yuri also appears, but Florin omits the fact that she is the daughter of the Demon King and does not tell Hiraku. Instead, she says that she doesn't need to be treated specially, so they can put her to work. While she is there, Hiraku asks Florin to show him around the village, and once she leaves them alone, they manage to warn them that if they work honestly, their attack on the village will be forgiven. After showing them around the place, the trio of noble girls talk about how ridiculous it is that people as important as they have to stay in a place that's in the middle of nowhere. At night, the 3 try to escape, but they faint from fright when they see the hellhounds outside and one of Sabutin's offspring. After several failed attempts, they give up completely, so they help Florin with the pile of office work she is pending, becoming the City Hall girls. Meanwhile, after getting to know the village well for a few days, Princess Yuri is very surprised, saying she can't believe that such a world exists outside of the Demon Kingdom. She admits she has always been very ignorant of the outside world, even bringing war and conflict to this peaceful and wonderful village. During several days, the princess and the City Hall girls spent most of their time helping with the crops and participating in village activities, interacting with the children and the villagers. After some time, Princess Yuri finally departs, expressing her gratitude and stating that she has learned a lot during her stay in the village. On the other hand, the City Hall girls decide to stay, enchanted by the village's food and other benefits. They excuse their stay by saying they still have many things to learn and much work to do. Shortly after Yuri's departure and the pre-hibernation harvests, they collected so many vegetables that they didn't even fit in the storage. Due to this, they ask Hiraku if they can take some crops to their respective parents. The protagonist readily agrees to this request. Hakurin also asks to take some crops to her parents and takes the opportunity to ask about Hiraku's parents. They discover that Hakurin's parents are feared dragons who live separately in the north and south, known as the Dragon Emperor 12 and the Hurricane Ray Dragon. Hakurin sets out to bring crops to her parents, while Lasti does the same with hers. Elastic continues her journey to the city of Zacchato to deliver the crops there. While there, Michael asks her to exterminate a monster that has been attacking the merchant forests. The monster turns out to be a chanko, a type of fish mentioned by Iraku before. Lasti is excited to easily defeat the monster and brings Iraku the chanko's meat as a token of appreciation. On the other hand, when Hakurin returns, she brings with her a group of mountain elves who wanted to move to the village. The group's leader explains that they usually live in the mountains, but lately they've had trouble finding food. Hiraku decides to help them and begins to plan where they can stay while they build their future home. This makes the group of mountain elves very happy, and they become official residents of the village. Time passes, and gradually, autumn gives way to winter. Hiraku visits Lulusi, who hasn't been feeling well and has been bedridden. Tia and Sina accompany him, and after asking questions and analyzing the symptoms, they conclude that Lulusi is pregnant. Both she and Hakurin are surprised by this news. Over time, Lulusi's belly grows considerably, and although the village is filled with joy upon learning about her pregnancy, Lulusi remains calm about it. Hiraku worries about her, although Lulusi assures him that she is fine. The protagonist returns to their routine, ensuring that everything in the house is in order and taking care of the crops to protect them from pests. There are no common pests in this world, but some strange black creatures that feed on plant leaves appear. Fortunately, the offspring of Dark Sabaton and the others know how to deal with them, using powerful agricultural tools like watering cans to get rid of these creatures without causing real harm to the crops. Despite that, Hiraku feels very happy to see all the crops progressing. In addition to the crops, the animals also thrive, as they are informed shortly after that the cows have given birth to calves. The protagonist works even harder to improve the village, even building a plot of beautiful flowers for decoration. In addition to their farming work, they are responsible for building a variety of things that the villagers request, including toys for the children, a task that becomes easy thanks to the omnipotent agricultural tool. Occasionally, everyone comes together for battle training, following Anne and the maid's advice to have regular training as a precaution. One day, Sina runs to the protagonist, warning them about the presence of a strange man in the village. Hiraku goes to investigate and indeed finds a strange man prostrating himself in front of the statue of the world's god that he carved some time ago. Shortly after, they discover that this man is the progenitor of the vampires and technically the grandfather of Lulusi and Flora. The man explains that upon learning of Lulusi's pregnancy, he was sure there must have been some mistake, as vampires rarely form new blood pacts. Despite his initial surprise, Bargrav is happy and willing to take care of the children. He apologizes for entering the village without proper greeting and reveals that he initially only planned to take a look and leave, but he felt drawn to the statue of the great creator under the great tree. The protagonist asks him if he met God. Bargrav responds affirmatively, stating that God advised him to strive, even though he would be born with a slightly abnormal body. He explains that he remembers God, but strangely, he cannot recall the exact appearance of God. Despite his numerous attempts, he never managed to create something as close to God as Hiraku did when he carved the statue. Though excited, Hiraku clarifies that the statue belongs to the village and cannot be offered to him. Despite his disappointment, Hiraku decides to carve another statue for Bargrav, who leaves happily. After Bargrav's departure, Flora tells Hiraku that he turned out to be an easy person to deal with, despite his importance and high rank. This surprises Hiraku, as he was unaware of Bargrav's significance. On the other hand, Bargrav returns to the temple after 50 years with the intention of consecrating the statue that Hiraku carved in the best place. The elderly temple keeper is fascinated when he sees the statue and suggests that everyone should know the sculptor's name. However, Bargrav suggests that it's not a good idea, as Hiraku doesn't seem to appreciate that kind of recognition and doesn't want to disturb his peaceful life. Nevertheless, he decides they can support him quietly and instructs the elder to inform all other temples to be respectful of him, as well as the village of the Great Tree. Later on, Bargrav sends an elegant and valuable high-quality piano to the village. Hiraku refuses to accept it as payment for the statue, but Bargrav explains that it's a gift to celebrate Lulu's pregnancy. The piano is placed in the village dining hall, and shortly after, another practice piano is delivered at the request of the city hall girls who didn't dare to play the more elegant piano for fear of damaging it. The pianos turn out to be a success, as everyone wants to play them, although only Florin and the Demon Realm girls can play well. However, all the others enjoy practicing together and improving their skills. And so, the anime comes to an end. What did you think of the story? If you liked it, do not hesitate to like and subscribe to the channel, which would help me a lot. Here, you will also find other summaries that might interest you. My name is Alex, and with nothing more to add, I wish you a happy day, evening, or night. See you, buddy. Bye bye.